My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Representative Jason Knight, a Democrat who represents the 67th District that encompasses parts of Barrington and Warren. He's a practicing criminal defense attorney and a 5-term state representative. Welcome back to State of the State.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, I've got to ask you right out of the box. I've been told that you are raising money and intend to run to replace or fill the AG's office, which will be vacant in 2006. Do you want to confirm or deny that?
Well, my goal is to serve. I'm really done, I think, a good job in my role as a state rep. I'm uniquely qualified for that job at Attorney General's office. I am gearing up to make an announcement. I'm not prepared to announce today.
Okay. But in your background, you did serve as a prosecutor in the Attorney General's office at one point in your career, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, I have been told twice, personally, that House Judiciary Chairman Bob Craven from North Kingstown is going to run, and I also understand that outgoing U.S. Attorney Zachary Cuna has indicated he may be also a candidate. So there would clearly have to be a Democrat Party primary for that office, a two or three way. And I suspect that the winner of that primary would be the next Attorney General, because I'm very doubtful that a Republican will hold general office or even congressional office for a long, long time in the state. Do you think that is, well, would you be prepared for a primary, and is that really helpful for the party to have these primaries? We had one that replaced Congressman Cicilline with about 11 or 12 people running.
Oh, well, I mean, the politics of the situation will certainly work itself out, certainly by primary day and election day. I think it's good to have elections where there are qualified candidates who put themselves up to the people to make their cases about why they should be elected. Ultimately, robust elections are helpful to the electorate. It's helpful to our democracy in Rhode Island, and I think it's a good thing. So I like to see a robust campaign for every seat that's out there.
If there's more than one or more than two candidates running, are you in favor of some system whereby we would have a runoff election to the two top getters, or are you okay with the idea of a winner of a plurality of the vote being the candidate, or a successful candidate?
I prefer, you're talking about ranked choice voting?
Well, either that or some system.
Something like that, what it's normally called. I like ranked choice voting. You know why? Because it took a long time for me to sort of get this, because you know, you have to sort of see one in action to really get it. But a ranked choice election is, you know, you have 5 candidates for whatever the seat is. You count the ballots the first out, right? Everyone marks their first, second, third choices. You count the ballots for the first out. The bottom one drops off, and then you have an instant runoff, another election, and you whittle it down till you get to 2. Who's got the majority of the votes? And these are expressed votes. I think that's more reflective of the people's will than just a plurality election.
Well, of course, in the situation we had in the first congressional district, we had 11 or 12 people. I mean, it would take a long time to just, there'd have to be a system to get it down to 2 candidates much quicker than.
Well, that's what happens in a properly run ranked choice thing. You mark your candidates in order of preference, and then the ballots are counted by the machines automatically.
Okay.
Well, at least that's my layman's understanding of how it goes.
That's a whole other topic.
Right.
I was just curious as to your reaction if you were involved in that.
When they're run well, I think they're more reflective of the voters' will.
Fair enough. Now, Governor McKee has proposed a budget in excess of $14 billion for the coming fiscal year. And this actually may not be enough to close a projected budget that might be as much as $300 million. Advocacy groups in the state are already demanding more money. Now, ever since the federal spending spree that accompanied the COVID pandemic, we've had budgets, large budgets in Rhode Island, and we've had people from both sides of the aisle at the State House say that they were concerned that these budgets, these emergency budgets would become the baseline, when it seems to have happened. Are you concerned that Rhode Island is on a spending spree? Will we be able to control this level of spending that's going on?
Well, I support Rhode Island spending within its means, and that's why we have a balanced, that's why the Constitution of Rhode Island requires a balanced budget. And every year, the House and our House fiscal staff and the Speaker and his leadership team put forward a balanced budget. We have structural deficits in the budget that frankly need to be taken care of. And I think that as the money that was allocated in prior budgets, the ARPA money and other kinds of money that came from the feds, that's going to filter through, and eventually our budget will settle. I expect our budget to settle down where it needs to settle down. There's a lot of stuff that is allocated but not yet spent. So I see that, I don't see us on a glide path upward forever and ever and ever to an unsustainable budget. Our Constitution simply won't allow it.
Now, people have to understand that the governor's budget is merely a proposal. It's up to the House, primarily the Finance Committee, that works a budget that is then approved by the House, sent over to the Senate, and approved, and then it goes to the governor, who does not even have a line item veto. He has to yes or no, and if he vetoes it, we'll go through that whole process. But so it's important to understand that the governor's proposal is not the budget that's going to be enacted.
Yes, and piggybacking on to what you just said, it's a statement of priorities from the governors effectively saying to the legislature, hey, here's what we have going on in the executive branch. This is the money that we think we need going forward. This is the check we would like you to cut.
Right.
And then the House fiscal staff and the leadership team looks at our revenue estimates, which Rhode Island really gets a lot of kudos for having strong revenue estimating. There's the last conference is in May, and after that, that's where they settle down and get down to brass tacks about what we can afford and what we can't afford, trying to give the governor what he wants, but at the same time, nobody gets everything that they want in the legislative process.
One of the things the governor wants in his budget it's kind of unprecedented, which I want to take up with you. The governor, and even in his State of the State address, said that he submitted a budget that includes an amendment that would enact a comprehensive ban on semi-automatic firearms, and not just so-called assault weapons, which really has nothing to do with the funding process to operate the state government, but it almost seems to be an end around the legislative process. People have to understand that amendments to the budget can become law, but this is kind of unprecedented for a governor to come out and say, okay, I'm going to do this as part of my budget. It has nothing to do with funding the state. And I understand that you and Representative Justine Caldwell from East Greenwich on the last day of the last session tried to get a discharge petition from the Judiciary Committee to bring an assault weapon ban to the floor for a vote. Is that correct?
None of that's accurate.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So the governor, Justine Caldwell and I did not do anything of the kind to try to get a discharge petition going around an assault weapons ban.
Thank you for clarifying that.
We didn't do that. What the governor has proposed is an assault weapons ban. It's not a ban on semi-automatic weapons. Right? I don't think that would carry these days. No one's talking about that. It's an assault weapons ban along the lines of what's been introduced in the House and the Senate in the last few years. It is not unprecedented to put in changes like that into the budget as long as it's got a number attached to it, some sort of budgetary item attached. And in this particular case, I understand that there are tax exemptions that he has proposed for gun safety items such as safes and trigger locks and that sort of thing. So that's how they can put it in there. That's what makes it budgety. When the governor submits a budget, he's submitting it to the legislative process.
Right.
So that you can get to legislative process through a bill introduced by a rep or a senator. You can get to it through this proposal. I mean, even the governor's budget comes in the form of a bill that is introduced by representatives, Chairman Abney, the chairman of our budget committee. So it may be not the normal path or maybe not the most used path, but there's nothing unusual or weird about it.
Okay. So as long as it contains some sort of a fiscal aspect that can be amended. And you feel comfortable with that as opposed to having it go through the legislative process because...
But it will.
Well, to the extent that it'll go through the budgetary process. I guess my question is last year, the bill, I think that you either sponsored or co-sponsored. There was an assault weapon bill. Now, I checked the legislative website this morning, and no bills have been introduced so far, which is obviously early in the session. But do you think that you or some other colleagues will introduce, through the legislative end of it, an assault weapon ban again this year, or are you all in on this amendment idea?
I'm not, I'm skeptical that an assault weapons ban can be carried through in the budget just politically, right? I intend to introduce a standalone bill that's going to mirror what the governor proposed in his budget, or closely mirror it, and that will have its own legislative process attached to it. But everything that comes through the House, anything that the House does, it does go through a legislative process in that it's proposed by a representative, it's heard by a committee of representatives, and ultimately voted up or down by the committee, and ultimately voted up or down by the floor.
Yep, I understand. So with the bill that you're going to introduce, is it similar to the one that you introduced or you co-sponsored last year?
It's what's called a feature test, right?
Yeah.
So there's a couple different mechanisms
Right.
That states have used to achieve an assault weapons ban. This one will identify features, just like the bills we proposed in the past. It'll identify the features of the firearms that lend themselves to an AR style or an AK style, and without getting into too much of the details.
Well, it's okay, get into the details.
It will. I know we're limited for time,
No,
and
I'm
it will outlaw possession or distribution, sale, that sort of thing, of those style weapons. You'll still be able to have semi-automatic handgun, pistols, shotguns, long guns, that sort of thing.
Have you read the amendment that it's on the budget?
The one that the governor proposed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've looked at it.
And it does not include other types of semi-automatic firearms?
It has semi-automatic. It defines as an assault weapon certain semi-automatic shotguns, rifles, and pistols.
It does, okay.
What we called, when I was growing up, a machine pistol. That's the pistol part. But it's not like your average 9mm pistol that holds 10 rounds that you keep, in your gun safe at home.
Well, but what's confusing to me and other people is that you said it does include semi-automatic shotguns. And why is that an assault rifle, or as a semi-automatic?
You'll have to. These bills get very technical very quick, but going off my memory, right? Because I don't have the bill in front of me. The governor's bill would define as an assault weapon a semi-automatic a shotgun with a fixed magazine capable of holding more than 8 rounds.
Okay.
Or a semi-automatic shotgun that has a pistol grip, an expandable or telescopic stock, or certain accessories such as, believe it or not, a grenade launcher.
Which you can't have anyway.
And maybe 1 or 2 others. I don't have the text in front of me, but that's roughly what it is.
But okay. We kind of went around on this on the last program when you were on. We had the former Colonel of State Police, who was a co-chair of Governor Raimondo's working group on gun safety. And when I held up the model that you and I talked about before the program, I said, which of these features makes it more lethal than any other semi-automatic? And he pointed to the magazine, and he said that. So we've already banned magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. So if you don't have that, then technically, I guess, there's nothing about a pistol grip or a adjustable or collapsible stock that makes that any more lethal than any other semi-automatic.
I disagree with you, and we had this conversation last time, and I disagree with the Colonel as well. Those weapons are designed as battlefield weapons to lay down a lethal field of fire, to create an area in which it's easy to find targets and put a bullet through them. So there's several pieces of a modern assault weapon that make it more lethal than your standard handgun or a shotgun or a long gun. The pistol grip makes it easier to handle. A barrel shroud makes it easier to hold onto without burning your hands and aim. A threaded barrel means you can put on accessories such as a flash suppressor or muzzle brake that makes it either more accurate or more concealable. And of course, the actual weapon itself, it can carry a large round that travels very fast and makes big, big holes when it goes through people, bigger, and it does more damage than your standard handgun round. This is all the kind of things that I know we'll have a robust debate about when we get to committee at the House of Representatives and at the Senate. But for the record, I believe that these weapons contribute significantly to our gun violence problem in our country. I don't think the Second Amendment prevents us from saying those are not allowed for the general population to have.
I hate to argue with a lawyer, but the Supreme Court in Caetano versus Massachusetts ruled that it extended the Second Amendment to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, though not in existence at the founding of the country. And in the Bruin decision, it said that citizens have a right to own and carry a firearm outside their homes, and any gun law restriction had to be in place in 1791 when the Constitution was passed to have an effect today. So this argument that it only applies to muskets or that it's not covered, there are a lot of military-style weapons that people will point to and say, why is this more deadly than the ones that you define by a pistol grip? There's shotguns with a pistol grip that aren't any more dangerous than anything else. It's just that they're used for certain types of hunting. We could put that aside. Obviously, this is a subject of debate.
Is there a question in there?
I do want to ask this as you're a practicing attorney. Last year, you may be aware that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they did pass a very comprehensive, stringent gun control bill that was put through late in the session and late on a weekend or something. And Governor Healy, who was a former Attorney General, signed it into law. The disturbing thing was that there were sponsors of that bill in the Massachusetts legislature who admitted they knew it was unconstitutional. But they said they didn't care because it would take 5 or 6 years to go through the appeals process, and by then the damage would have been done, and damage being, the effect of the law would be in place. As a practicing attorney, as a member of our legislature who's taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, do you think that any legislator should be in a position or espouse a position that says the law I'm going to pass I know is unconstitutional, but so be it, we're going to let it go through? Not a hypothetical, it actually happened last year. So
obviously, I support the Constitution and of the United States and the checks and balances system that it's given us. I think it's that and the Declaration of Independence are foundational to our American society, and I'm grateful that I was born here and that I get to live under such a rule of law. And the same thing on the Constitution side for the Rhode Island government, which closely mirrors the structure of the federal government. But I would say this, the Constitution contemplates a robust competition between the three branches. Right? The executive is going to do what it thinks it wants to do. The legislative is going to do what it thinks it wants to do. And of course, the courts, when very shortly after the Constitution was ratified, said, oh, by the way, when we say what the law is, that's the law, right? So it sets up this three-way push and pull between the branches. I think that's an incumbent upon every legislator to do what they think is right and responsible for their voters, because frankly, the voters are the ones who put them there. Not everybody who goes up gets elected as a lawyer. Not everybody has deep knowledge about the Constitution. But if they're responding to what their voters want and they're legislating responsibly, I think by and large you're going to find that they do things that they believe is that they're doing in good faith. And I can't speak to Massachusetts.
No,
that's Massachusetts.
And I'm not presenting it as a hypothetical. This actually was commentary that came out of Massachusetts. It just seemed to me incongruous that a person who's taken an oath, who's in the legislative body, who's taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, who says, yeah, I know the law we passed is unconstitutional, but so what?
And I don't think anyone's done that in Rhode Island. And I would say to you that when it comes to sort of where we are, in the constitutional framework when it comes to Second Amendment stuff these days. Of course, you have the Bruin decision, which was one of the last major statements on this issue. But the Supreme Court, in the very next decision that had to do with gun laws, that is a lawsuit challenging whether or not you could ban a domestic abuser from being able to possess a firearm, to take away their Second Amendment rights. Different than the red flag thing, closely related. The Supreme Court said, yeah, that law can stand. And oh, by the way, in Bruin, we said there has to be a historical antecedent, but it's not a. They backed away from like this bright line rule of like if there had to be a law in the past before there could be a law now. They said that's not what we meant in that case, and we need to have a flexible approach to the firearms rules. They basically did paying attention to our founding fathers' intentions, but what a lot of the proponents of a sort of no questions asked, broad Second Amendment right want is to people interpret Bruin as in, unless there was a law in 1776 that says exactly what you passed today in 2025, it can't be done. That's not the rule.
No. Let's move on to another topic. Thank you. We know that there's been a delay in opening these shelters for the homeless that are called pallet shelters in Providence. I guess the state fire marshal says they're not up to code, so I can't issue a certificate of occupancy and so forth. Governor McKee recently came out and said, well, we're going to get through this. They'll be available on by the end of February 28th. Well, that's kind of past the winter season. I mean, we still have cold weather, but we're not in the critically cold weather that we've had. People look at this sort of thing, Representative Knight, and they say, this is really an example of government inefficiency, that if the government is involved in this, it just takes so long and it's so expensive to do these things. Do you feel that way? I mean, it seems to me if it was turned over to the private sector, it could have been done a lot quicker.
I don't think there's any excuse for those pallet shelters not to be open right now. I think that the executive has dropped the ball when it comes to getting those pallet shelters open. And I think that we need to have a real conversation about what it is that we need to do to correct the problem that prevents the executive branches, all the agencies working together, from coming together to meet a deadline. I don't know why we're in this boat. I'm not of the executive branch. I'm not on the governor's staff. All I can look at is the results. And the results are, it's cold outside. It's really cold outside, and those things aren't open. And frankly, if it was a fire marshal issue or whatnot, I'm sure there's things that could have been done in the summer or the fall to fix the issue. And now I understand it might be a power hookup issue and any number of other things. This is really not acceptable, and I think that we can do better.
Do you think, would that be the House Oversight Committee that would investigate that kind of thing? Or there's obviously a way for the legislature to look at this and this oversight role, correct?
There is. I think that the House certainly will have oversight hearings on, I don't know if they're actually planning oversight hearings on the pallet shelters. You may have better information than I do at this point.
Not at all.
The last I heard, the oversight meeting was going to meet around some of the perennial issues that has to do with childcare, and we were going to look at the bridge. I don't know if pallet shelters are on the.
We're smiling about the bridge, which you're obviously very familiar with.
Well, talk about failures of government, right? Yeah. Talk about whatever else is happening with the bridge. The fact that we are stuck with a bridge that failed before its time, and we're taken by surprise. That was a failure of government, and we should acknowledge it as such. I think that the Oversight Committee on the House will certainly look into that issue, and certainly others, and how well they do it, what kind of answers they get. That is, I think the process will reveal itself. I hope they get good answers, and I hope that the executive comes to oversight with the idea and intention of working together hand in hand with the General Assembly to try to improve the operation of the whole thing for the benefit of the people.
Well, I mean, the bridge thing is clearly just a major issue that it's really a lot of people, lay people outside of government look at it. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, but I know a little bit about bridges because of something in my background. And it just, when they came out and said that the deterioration in that structural environment or unit happened over a short period of time, it doesn't happen that quickly. So there's something that happened, and it just seems like the governor and Director Alviti are not willing to come forward and admit that this is what is wrong, and instead we're going through suing the contractors that built the bridge, the same people we want to build a new bridge.
I can't speak for Governor McKee, and I can't speak for the director, but I can speak for the 14,600 people in Barrington and Warren that I represent, and they will tell you that I'd like to know what happened, because the fact of the matter is the bridge failed. It failed unexpectedly, and somebody's responsible for it in state government and should be held accountable for it. Not a vendor, but somebody who works for the taxpayers who was supposed to be eyeballing that bridge.
Yeah. You and I are in total agreement, because I remember Director Alviti being interviewed, and all he kept repeating is, I'm an engineer and I build bridges. And I had to respond, yes, you are, but you're also a public servant. You're responsible to the public as a head of a department. You may be an engineer, but you're also responsible to the public. And it just seems to many, many people, and not only the people on your side of the bay, but everywhere, this is really crazy. And it could have been a disaster. I mean,
and thank God it wasn't.
And thank God it wasn't, absolutely. Right. And it's been a real burden for everybody. And I know businesses have closed on East Providence and so forth, and that's unacceptable. Let me just ask you, we have a short time left, but the governor has proposed, I guess, some sort of a tax on electric vehicles to offset the lost gasoline tax revenues. That are you in favor of that? I don't really understand the logic of that, but have you looked at what this proposal is? Well, I guess I understand the logic, but I don't think it's appropriate.
I think that when it comes to making the transition from fossil fuels to other kinds of energy, we ought to make it as easy as possible for the consumer to make the switch. Because let's face it, fossil fuels are on their way out. They're bad for the planet, and we should do what we can to help the consumer move on to an electric vehicle. An electric vehicle tax, it's a registration fee. It's an outrageous registration fee. It's like $300 a year, or $300 for 2 years, something along those lines. And I don't have it chapter and verse in front of me, but it's outrageous. And if it's there to make up for the loss of the gas tax, well, I think when you're balancing priorities, what's more important? A few pennies on the gas tax to cover to balance the budget, or let's help people when the next car purchase comes around, or they're deciding whether or not to even get a car. Maybe they'll get a ride share or something. They should be able to go electric, so that it's better for our air and better for our environment.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page on that one. We have about a minute left, and let me just ask you quickly about the turning the toll gantries back on, because the governor said we tax both in-state and out-of-state truckers. And this was first put in there, the predictions were they were going to be applied to regular passenger cars eventually.
Well, nobody I know is saying that. That was a talking point amongst people who were just against the whole idea. It says, oh my God, it's going to happen to the cars. You just watch, because they can't help themselves. Someday they'll turn it on for cars. You watch out. If you let the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak, now, it's going to be taxing cars. That's what they said back then.
So as a sitting legislator now, if that were to come before you, you'd be opposed to taxing?
I am absolutely not in favor of putting a highway tax on cars and regular passenger vehicles.
Okay. I believe we're almost out of time, and seriously, Representative, I'd like to thank you on behalf of State of the State for coming on again. Frankly, it's almost impossible. Our audience knows that it's very difficult to find people from the gun control groups to come on and talk about their position, and you've certainly been willing to do that twice. Congratulate you for that, and I hope that you will come back and see us either as a representative or maybe as Attorney General next time.
Well, it's always my pleasure.
Or a candidate for Attorney General.
It's always my pleasure to come. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I think it's really important for politicians and the leaders in our community to get out to shows like this, and it doesn't matter what the issues are. It's talk and tell people what they're thinking so that the voters can know what's going on and have a better idea. We don't help anybody when we turn away from the public.
Yeah. We do want to thank you, and I hope you spread the word on Smith Hill that we're harmless. But you're right. It's the whole thing about being responsible and your duties to the taxpayers and the voters of the state. And we want to thank everybody for watching this edition of State of the State, and stay tuned for future editions where we hope to have other representatives come forward. We hope to have in the near future Representative Chippendale and Senator De La Cruz come on as the minority leaders in the legislature to talk about their view of what's going on. Thank you for joining us on State of the State.